So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second annual Spring Refresh Professional Learning Series for school counselors. My name is Tanya, and I'm the counseling coordinator for the San Diego County Office of Ed. And this morning, both myself and Tracy, we'll do a quick introduction in just a second, are doing a webinar that I have actually received numerous requests for, and that's SSTs, 504s, and IEPs, oh my. And what the heck is our role as a school counselor? So today we're going to give you a lot of resources. We don't have all of the answers. We're also going to give you a lot of samples because this is something that, again, there is nothing truly written out there that gives us step-by-step instructions or has our roles and responsibilities clearly defined. And so we're hoping that after today's session, you will have what you need to move this work forward. So again, welcome, and we're excited that you're here. One more time, I just want to let you know that this webinar is recorded, and we will be able to post both the recording and our handouts and materials on the SDCOE School Counselor webpage following the session. Give us about 2 to 3 days, so early next week, you will see all of the resources posted. All right, like I mentioned, my name is Tanya Bulette, and I'm the counseling coordinator. I also wear some other hats in our county. I'm an adjunct instructor for Point Loma Nazarene University, and I see there's a couple of students in the session, so welcome. Also a professional learning specialist for Hatching Results, just started doing some of that work this year. And then also as a former high school counselor in the Grossmont Union High School District for 20 years. And I'm really grateful to my good friend of many, many years, Tracy Wilson. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself as well.
Sure, we're getting to the point where we don't want to say how many years, right? Good morning, everyone. Tracy Wilson. I'm currently the Director of College and Career Readiness in the Grossmont Union High School District, which is East San Diego County. We are a high school only district. And I also, like Tanya, dabble a little bit in teaching at San Diego State University, future school counselors. I see many of you in the chat as well. It's super exciting. Also do some work with Hatching, and I was a high school vice principal and of course a high school counselor. Still am. I'm a counselor at heart all the time. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to give up that role.
Yeah.
All right. So the webinar topics, we want to keep this pretty simple because this can be very overwhelming. So our topics that we're going to address today are SSTs, 504s, and IEPs. What are the processes? What are the meetings? What are our roles in those different areas? And then we'll talk specifically about the school counselor's role as far as what's appropriate and inappropriate, what some of those duties are. And then we have some gold for you at the end, so you got to hang tight. But we have a really great resource shop in which you can just click and then you'll get the resource. It'll also explain what it's for, an IEP and SST. So it's a pretty simple, easy, quick find if you need to find or look for a resource. All right, so we're going to get started with the big one, why you're here today. So first of all, just to give you a reminder or an overview, the acronym SST, it could mean various things. So I've put the three that I commonly hear. You hear student support team, which is probably one that you may or may not use. Student study team is what you see probably the most in a lot of different resources and different literature. And then there's student success team. I always liked either the first one or the last one because I didn't really understand student study team and how that applied to this process. But again, it may look different no matter where you're at or what you want to call it. And then we also have school site technicians that are also SST. So SST means all kinds of different things, but that's just part of our wonderful school educational jargon that we use and all the different acronyms. But whatever you decide to use, SST is typically the term. So what is it? It basically a student study team meets regarding children for whom there are concerns. So if someone has a concern, whether it be a teacher, a parent, a school counselor, you notice that grades are slipping or there might be some difficulty understanding materials at an appropriate age level. you might want to call what's called an SST meeting, in which to begin the process of kind of exploring what are some of the reasons why a student is not doing well in their classes. So it's a site team. And like I mentioned, it involves a variety of people, parents, teachers, who are going to assist regular education students who are not progressing satisfactorily. So it aims to increase those positive income for students, and basically to give them what's called an even playing field in a classroom, in a general education classroom. Basically, parents, teachers, students, anybody can refer. I even had a student self-refer for an SST. Again, I'm from the high school level, so I don't know if that would happen in elementary, but some students just want to go, what is wrong? Why am I not understanding this? So, students can as well. But it has a variety of people that are involved in it, and that can differ depending on what site you're at, the district you're in. And again, it's put in place to examine the academic behavior and the social emotional progress. There can be a variety of specific interventions in which to put in place to monitor and determine the success. And it's there to determine if the struggles are due to a learning disability or something else. And depending on what the recommendation is from the team once they meet, the student could be referred to special education or special education evaluation for testing, or possibly a 504 plan. And what we've put down here is a resource which gives you a sample, and I'm going to use that word a lot, a sample on some staff guidelines that a district put together, and the different roles and responsibilities that the variety of people can have, from an assistant principal or an administrator or a counselor, a parent. What does that look like? So you can get some ideas as to what an SST is. So here is the sample process that we used when I was in the Grossmont Union High School District at the school site that I was at. And it actually worked really, really well. We defined our process, and we also made sure that it was in writing so that all 4 or 5 counselors on our team were doing and handling the same process. And as you see, anybody can put in the request. So what does that look like? Is it a form? Is it verbal? Who is going to be the gatherer of those requests? And then who is going to set up the meeting? So meeting attendees, like you see, can be a variety of different people. Sometimes though, if you're looking at an SST meeting that is run in the morning, or it's going to be held after lunch, and a teacher is teaching, what you may consider for the SST is sending out a form in which the teacher can provide feedback and notes. So if they're not able to attend the meeting, they could provide that information in advance so that the SST team can evaluate it and see maybe what some of the, not trends, but what's happening in their classroom, and does it seem similar to everything else across the board. So those notes are invaluable. And you do want to make sure that your teachers know the process and that they return those by the time you as a school counselor can look them over before the SST meeting. And then during the meeting, you're going to discuss a variety of interventions. And you may say, well, what do I even know to say as a school counselor in an SST meeting? I'm going to talk about that role in a minute, but there are lots of different things that you can put in place. You can say, you know what, here's a tutoring schedule. Here are some of the options you can do. Again, the purpose of an SST meeting is really to figure out kind of what's happening. And you want to give them a window in which to put in place the interventions that you are recommending. And then maybe after 6 weeks, you can see their progress grades. You can evaluate if the interventions are working, or if they're not even putting those interventions in place, then maybe you need to have another 6-week monitoring period until they do. You really want to make sure that you are exhausting all of your options before you refer to a 504 or special education testing. Only because the more information you have, the better your results and the more supports you can provide, and really figure out the right supports. And like I mentioned, 6-week follow-up meeting, make sure that you're putting that meeting in place the day that parents are there, so that everybody has it on their calendar. And then that's when you'll come back I would gather teacher notes again, let them know of the interventions, and then see where they're at and if things are better. And if not, then evaluate again as a team and see what areas you need to improve upon or support. All right.
Question in the chat.
Yes.
From Megan. It says it seems that in her district, maybe the counselors are the gatekeepers or initiators and coordinators of all SSTs, even in situations where an IEP assessment request was made by the family. And is that our experience? And what is our opinion on that?
Okay.
So I will say yes, in most places, probably the counselors are the place where the SST meeting is initiated or started. I do think it's very important for counselors to understand that if there is a request from a family, that yes, the meeting needs to happen, but there's also a timeline that gets triggered. And so we just really want to be mindful of that, and including, your special ed team, maybe from the beginning. I know I worked at a school site where the school psychologist did not want to even engage in anything until that SST meeting process had happened, the first and the follow-up, and being able to show where, what interventions we tried. It's really hard because I think sometimes the SST meeting gets intertwined with like a teacher meeting, and truly the SST is more when there's I was going to say an understanding, that's not the right word. Someone believes there might be a learning gap or a barrier or something. And if it's just an issue with one class and one teacher, I don't know that an SST process needs to happen, but I do think those get intertwined often. If someone truly believes there's a barrier to learning, then that's when we need to trigger that process. So I don't know if that helped Megan or not, but.
Thank you, Tracy. I was looking for my chat. Sorry about that, using all these multiple screens. And so thank you for taking that. And yes, everything and above. And again, if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat or in the Q&A. All right, so 504 versus IEP, what's the difference? So I get this a lot, and this is something that I actually share with my graduate students, because this isn't often in a book, a textbook, or even how to, in part of your graduate program, do you really talk about this or what that process looks like? Again, it's going to be different. So we could be talking about this, and I think I saw in the chat, someone calls the process a PST. So we're all calling it different things because that's what we do. We make it confusing. So I'm going to show you a 2-minute video, and during the video, these are 5 questions that I just want you to kind of be answering, or when you hear the answer, just be thinking about, so that you can kind of get some of the key points that it's covering.
There are many differences between an IEP and a 504 plan. The first and most fundamental is they're governed by different laws. An IEP is governed by a special education law. 504 is governed under a civil rights law. And that makes a difference in what kinds of services and how an IEP plan and 504 plan come together. To qualify for an IEP, you have to have one of 13 specified conditions or disabilities that are written in the law. For example, specific learning disability, which would be something like dyslexia, would be a condition that a child would qualify for an IEP under. Having one of those 13 identified disabilities isn't enough to make sure your child gets an IEP. Whatever is going on with your child, whatever that disability is, also has to affect his performance in the classroom. And that's really important to know, because sometimes parents think that just having a disability qualifies for an IEP, but you also need to make sure that it's making a difference. It has what's called educational impact, adverse impact in the classroom for how your child's learning. For a 504 plan, a child needs to have a disability that is getting in the way of his learning in the general education classroom. The difference isn't that he needs specialized instruction, it's that he needs some changes to get benefit from his education the same way as other kids in that classroom. And so kids who have ADHD often have 504 plans, and what happens is just changes are made to the environment, and those changes are called accommodations. And those changes are made in the general education classroom and don't require specialized instruction. So for example, a child with ADHD may need extra time to work on a test or to get his homework done. So some people are concerned that a 504 plan isn't as good as an IEP. And the truth of the matter is that a 504 plan or an IEP can meet your child's needs. It just depends on how well it's put together. A well-written, well-implemented plan that everybody knows what's going to be happening and in place and is working on it can be very helpful for a child who doesn't need that specialized instruction. As long as there's a lot of follow-through and everybody's checking in to make sure it's working well, a 504 plan can be very helpful for kids in the classroom.
Key takeaways.
All right. So just to give you a recap of what the answers are, is that an IEP is governed by special education law. So that's important to note because it is the last 3 letters here, law. And so there are certain requirements and procedures that must happen. For instance, if someone is referred to the school psychologist, if they're the ones that are testing for an IEP, there are a certain amount of days that they must respond to that request. And so it's really important to know what those laws are. And we have people out there, and you saw that she was an advocate. We have lots of advocates that are out there that could attend an IEP meeting, and they're going to be very knowledgeable about what's in the law. So it's very important that you understand that as well and know what the timeline looks like. And then a 504 plan is governed by a civil rights law. So that's going to look a little different, and I'll cover what that is in just a moment. And what's the biggest difference? Again, an IEP requires one of 13 different disabilities that are outlined in that, again, law. And then the 504 is used for a disability that gets in the way. It's something that yes, you should revisit every year, just like you have an annual plan for an IEP. However, a 504 isn't as strict in how it is written or in the things that you can provide accommodations for. And so a 504 plan covers kids with disabilities who don't require that specialized instruction by a teacher who has those credentials. And then the difference between the two, the accommodations, again, they're going to level the playing field. So if a student needs, because they have dyslexia, they need some more time on tests, or if maybe they have ADHD and they just need to take a short break, step out of the classroom, those are the accommodations that you can provide. Modifications are changes in the curriculum. So you have to be careful with this, especially at the high school level, because if you're putting in a modification, it might not, the modification could jeopardize that student getting a diploma, because now you're talking about other pieces of what's part of the graduation requirement. And so again, those are some pieces that you have to really make sure you're looking at, because it could be the difference between a certificate or a diploma, and most families want to ensure that their student is getting a diploma. Okay, so 504. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So 504 plans are formal plans that you can develop. They cover any condition that limits daily activities in a major way. And these plans are there to prevent the discrimination and protect students. They are confidential. So a little bit about the Rehabilitation Act. This fact sheet is really helpful. It just kind of spells it out in a really easy way. But basically, like we said, Section 504 is that federal civil rights law. It was put in place in 1973. And again, it's there for discrimination by public schools. It's there to protect students from discrimination in public schools or by any college, trade school, or private school that gets federal funding. So it's not just in K through 12, but it does protect students in post-secondary as well. What does it cover? It covers students of all ages. They could have a physical or mental disability that limits them. And so it can include reading, learning, and concentrating. All of those things are covered. And then people with disabilities have the right to a public education, with a written 504 plan when the disability gets in the way. So my son had a 504 put in place. When we detected, and his teachers really helped me with this, that he was in class, but he was just kind of not in class. And we thought all through elementary school, it was more or less that he was daydreaming. And so when teachers would ask at the beginning of the year, what should we know about your student? Up until 7th grade, I was constantly putting, he likes to daydream. It's at least what I've heard, happens in the classroom. But actually he had inattentive ADHD when we went and really investigated what was happening. And we started to see OCD behaviors. We started to see a lot of things really cause him to struggle in the classroom and with his work. And so having that feedback from his teachers and then allowing us to start the process of what, we could do to support him allowed us to, by his 8th grade year, to have in place a 504 to support some of those things and provide those accommodations, so that his teachers all knew what was happening in the classroom and that it wasn't just daydreaming. And then these are some of the things that a 504 plan may include. The accommodations, which we talked about, could be some assistive technology. Maybe they need some additional tools, like to use a calculator on a math test. That if students in the gen ed class aren't allowed to use a calculator, if it's deemed that this is an accommodation that would help the student, then with the teachers, of course, knowledge, they would be allowed to use the calculator. And then, of course, different school services. So I know I keep saying, what is a 504 plan? But I think having the definitions and terms is very important. It is a blueprint to support the student with the disability and remove those barriers to learning. And again, give them that level, equal playing field. They are not, again, a part of special education. They are completely two different things, but the goal is really the same. And it's all through accommodations that you're going to put in place on a 504 plan. Extended time on test, those short breaks, just basically determined by what the disability is. Then you are going to put in place those accommodations. And those are all being discussed in a meeting in which you have to put the 504 plan in place. And then, yes.
My lights just went out. Can I just share a personal thing real quick? So I'm also a parent of a student with a 504 in high school with anxiety. And I know that's one that sometimes, and I will share that I was that person as well, like, really? But I can tell you that my daughter suffers from anxiety, severe anxiety. And even the thought of this meeting and these accommodations was debilitating for her. So when you are meeting with families and thinking about that student and kind of what they need, not even for just students with anxiety, but the thought of being in a meeting with adults and having to talk about themselves is really difficult for students. So just keeping that in mind when you're hosting those meetings or helping in those meetings, just really being attuned to what is happening with the student, is really helpful. And even when writing the accommodations, sometimes what we write in the student will never do, but we need to put them in place because they need to be available to them. But I guess that empathy piece of really understanding that a meeting with a whole bunch of adults talking about a student and what's wrong with them is very, very difficult for a student. And just remembering that as in our role as a counselor.
And as a parent too, because it could be very personal, some of the disabilities that they have. So that's a great point, Tracy. And another thing is think about what this is culturally. The school I was at, there was a large population of Arabic students, and one of the parents came to me and knew that there was a disability, but she said, please, you have to keep this a secret that I'm seeking out support for a learning disability. It was at a point where she couldn't have any family members know. It was so drastic that she actually went out of the country to have him looked at and tested by a physician. So it's important to understand culturally what this means as well. And if a parent absolutely cannot, it's real. We can't just poo-poo it and say, oh, come on, let's have it. This is here to help you. It's very, very real, some of the differences that cultures view students with disabilities. So this is the sample document that Grossmont used when I was there. Again, I always stress in a meeting that it's confidential. And even when these accommodations are put in place, they are given to every single teacher. And they all have to sign that they have the 504 document. And then it is returned to whoever the gatekeeper is to make sure that these documents are on file. And so it should describe the professional diagnosis of the disability. It's very helpful to have a doctor's note, but it is not required. Student eligibility, get back on my tab. If they're eligible for it, is the diagnosis and the disability something that we can provide accommodations for? Who is responsible for it? Who are those folks? And you'll see that over here, once the accommodation is listed, you're going to put who is responsible. Is it just the student? Is it the student and the teacher? So for instance, if a student needs to take a break, are the teachers aware of that? Or is the teacher going to go, no, you need to sit and wait? Because this is confidential, if a student requests that they need to take a 5-minute break and it's in their accommodation, then it must be allowed. And sometimes we have to remind the teacher. I always told the student, for the first couple of times that you request your accommodation, make sure that you say 504, you give them a keyword because your teacher may not be with all the students that they have. It might take a little bit of time for them to get comfortable and used to the 504 and knowing what's in the document. And then different meeting participants, how are you going to have that handled? Are you going to use teacher notes? Are teachers going to be there? Because we couldn't always have teachers available, most of them would come because they would want to support the student. But if they couldn't, we want to make sure that they at least got the document, it was signed. And then this was our sample process at our school. And again, it's going to look different everywhere. But we would have the meeting, and this could be deemed after the SST. So the SST meeting has happened, or because we got a physician's note saying this student has X, Y, or Z, we may jump right into having a 504. It doesn't always require an SST. SST is more for exploration. Whereas if we know what the diagnosis is, then we can go ahead and start the 504 process. Again, parents provide the documentation of the disability, which is super helpful. I always say start with your physician if a parent is unsure, just because those notes are really helpful. And oftentimes the doctor will provide accommodations for the student that you could actually add into the 504. And we talked about this already, but the team reviews it. Again, you stress that it's confidential. Sometimes we'll give students a card in which they can just flash in front of the teacher, or to, if there's a substitute, to remind them that they have a 504 plan. Okay, and then determining roles. Tracy found this great worksheet that actually is very helpful in determining, well, what does our process look like? Who are the roles? And this uses our ASCA position statements and ethical standards to help you decide what is our role and is this appropriate. So this is a great tool in which you can go through different areas of a 504 and is it appropriate? And you can see yes, and the backing is because it's in our ASCA position statement. So this is a really helpful document that you can force a copy to and edit. All right.
There was a couple questions.
All right.
About 504s and IEPs affecting enrollment in the military. So I will share, and we'll talk about a little bit more in the IEP, but an IEP is only until a child is age 18 or 22. I mean, if they turn 18 and they graduate from high school, their IEP ends. If they can, continue on with services, but they're educational services. So an IEP does not follow a student into the military. However, a 504 is not dictated by age. It actually is could be a lifelong rehabilitation plan for someone. So I don't know, maybe someone can put in the chat. I don't know how that works in the military, but it is a civil rights law that appropriate accommodations are made. Now, if they're around learning, you know, maybe it's something to do in the actual classes of the military. I'm not saying that right, I know, but you know, unless it's something for them physically that they cannot do. But then again, I don't know the military stance on that. So I'm sorry that I don't know the answer to that as I babble, but if anybody does and can put that in the chat, that would be great.
And then I saw from Robin, is that the other question? So yes, absolutely, Robin. And we're going to give you some resources to support what you have said there in the chat, that most counselors facilitate 504 meetings, although it's not the role of the counselor. And so I, several years ago, a school that I was at was actually at that time, I was surprised because we were the ones that had to call the meeting. I would bring the family in and we would put the 504 plan together. And then it was my job at that school to get all of that paperwork out. And when we started to really look at that role as in fact, the district put in place a policy as well as provided professional learning for all administrators and school counselors to have one seamless process where the administrator was the one that was running the meeting with the school counselor supporting. And that when that was put in place, it really changed things. And it actually made relationships with administrators better. School counselors had support. And again, we weren't the ones that were driving the conversation, but we were there because we know our students and how to best support them because we have that holistic lens. And so having us there to provide that information and to just be on top of what you know, students needed was great. And so there are different things, and I know a lot of you struggle or you're in situations where that is in fact the case, and that's what's happening. And we're hoping that by the end of this, you have the resources you need to start asking some questions and moving forward with some different best practices.
Okay, there was one other question in the Q&A about if a doctor's note is not required for a 504, who would give the professional diagnosis?
So again, you don't have to have a doctor's note. There was a time when we were requiring that, and we had to get rid of that just because of equity. Not everybody might have that available to them. And so that might start with an SST then. And we would again start to explore. And then if we say, okay, let's try this out, or yes, we think maybe it's ADHD, but it wasn't diagnosed. Again, it's how you write the plan, but you don't have to have that note in which to put your stamp of approval. Also, if you transfer from school to school, if you, you know, need to, that's another issue. And it's important for families to have that documentation so they could take it to the new school and get a meeting set up right away so that everybody's on board with those accommodations. And it should be reviewed annually at the beginning of the year and distributed to the teachers. And if those teachers change at the semester, you need to make sure that you have, and that's at the high school or maybe the middle school, then you need to make sure that the new teachers get the accommodations as well. But I'm gonna let Tracy move forward with the presentation, and we'll hit the rest of the questions after.
Thank you. One other thing that's a big difference between a 504 and an IEP is a 504, the school develops the plan. Yes, we have the meeting. Yes, we ask for input and we ask for things, but truly the school is the one who determines what those accommodations are. In an IEP, it is a team decision, and we'll talk about that. You know, just real quick, just some important terms. Tanya, sorry, I'm trying to advance.
Oh,
I'm doing it the wrong thing.
All right, answer.
Yeah. Important terms to just be familiar with. I'm sure you've heard all of these, but IDEA or IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Again, that is the law that governs the special education programs. FAPE is free and appropriate public education. And I will say that when I was first starting in school counseling, I never heard the word FAPE, and now it is something we use often. And that is that word appropriate is probably the one that we're going to spend a little bit of time on. Then of course, LRE, or least restrictive environment. And I think sometimes this one gets confusing because everyone assumes that means at my school or not at my school. And truly an LRE can happen within a school. So you can have students that are in fully supported classes versus being fully out in general ed. You could have special programs on your campus, those kinds of things. So it's the least restrictive environment, even within a campus. And then of course, the term IEP just means individualized education plan. And again, some links to some really good documents there at the bottom. This also is something, if you're not familiar with IEPs, to really wrap your head around, because sometimes they're overwhelming. I don't know about you, but if you open one, I always say they're hundreds of pages, I'm exaggerating, but it feels like it, right? There's lots of education lingo in there that is just hard to understand. And this kind of breaks it down for you. What are the different components of an IEP? We don't have time to sit and go through them today, but there's a link in the resource shop we're going to share with you that is super helpful, that is very simplistic about different parts of an IEP, because there are very important components there. Okay, so the school counselor role. So again, we're going to call this a sample process. Every district is different, every school site is different, and you really just need to work within your space. Counselors need to be at IEP meetings, especially the annual reviews. The process in our district is that counselors don't need to stay the entire time. That might not be the same in yours. And then there's others where I have talked to counselors who are like, I've never been to an IEP meeting. And I will be the first to share that I think that's a disservice to students. You have an expertise as a counselor, and you need to be in there working with families and students on their educational plan. Especially when we're talking about scheduling or academic accommodations in a classroom or modifications, your feedback is really, really important. And that's what it is, right? You're a team member in the meeting. You should not be leading IEP meetings. But it's important to come prepared. That's what I will share. You need to come with like a current grade. It's almost like a parent meeting, right? That you would do for any other student. But the grades, the attendance, the behavior, if you're in a high school, a transcript. Definitely, if you can, speak with, we call them advocate teachers in our district, but I know they're called case managers, whoever is kind of overseeing the student's IEP for them. And the school psychologist, if you can touch base with them ahead of time and just make sure there's nothing that's going to come up that you're not prepared for. But, you know, we have an expertise and we need to be able to show it and support our students as well. And then hopefully you have a relationship with that student also, and you are there to advocate for them and what they need. So there's this is for my high school folks. There's something called a transition plan or an individual transition plan in an IEP. And it's super important because I feel like many times maybe the counselor is an afterthought in this conversation, or it's a checkbox for maybe a case manager on completing for a student. But this is where like the meat, in my opinion, of what we do is. So what it says is that no later than the year before the student's going to turn 16 for their annual review, for lack of a better word, there must be a post-secondary goal with assessments, and then conversation around what they're going to do after high school, and then independent living skills goals as well. There's a really good link there as well, but Tanya, we can go to the next one. So I can share. So these are the components of an individualized transition plan. And again, this happens for every student before they turn 16. So most of the time that's going to happen in a end of year 9th grade or in the middle of 10th grade IEP annual review. But go ahead and just take a second and read what the components are, right? Secondary training, post-secondary goals and employment, independent living, their course of study. Are they diploma bound or certificate bound? Are they going to be able to, this is where the conservatorship is more like when they turn 18, does that student, can they make decisions about whether or not they continue on or not continue on? But a lot of this language is counseling language, right? Like it's all things that hopefully we are doing with all of our students anyway. And I have worked with many different districts where those are two different things happening for a student. There's something happening with counselors. Counselors come in, we do something, we use Zello, maybe it's Naviance, maybe it's another tool, California Colleges, and the student maybe gets some stuff there. And then they have a conversation with their case manager about what they're going to do after high school. And I've sat in so many IEP meetings where it just said, going to community college with a checkbox. And there's never been a conversation between all three or even including parents there. You know, I've had a lot of people tell me that I'm going to go here, I'm going to go do this is a post-secondary plan. And I push back on that because I feel like, no, does the student know how they're going to do that, right? Have we helped them register? Have we helped them connect with whether that individual is that they need to at the campus they're going to, the trade school, the recruiter for military. So let's just figure out how we can all come together and support the student on what they're doing after high school. But again, sometimes that's hard in 9th and 10th grade. But you know, we use, like I said, we use Zello, and there's some resources and assessments that are taken in there that can be used as the assessments for this. So I'm going to show you a couple samples here. So this is what it looks like on an IEP. So again, it says, upon completion of school, I will attend a community college. And then you'll see on the right-hand side, it's activities. Visit the community college, complete the FAFSA, I should say Orcada, participate in the club at school, and then the related services. So again, I feel like these are a lot of counseling things that we are already doing. And instead of capturing it in the IEP, they're two separate things. So if you are a high school person, I'm just saying, please be very aware of the individualized transition plans and make sure you are a part of that. Okay, so now let's talk real quick about what happens when they go on to post-secondary plans, because there's a lot of questions. A lot of families ask, does my IEP go with me? And the answer is no. If a student graduates from high school, they no longer receive IEP services. Doesn't mean they can't get services at their wherever they're going, community college or four-year universities. The difference is they're not necessarily automatic, but the student almost has to advocate for themselves to get them. I've worked really closely with our community colleges and shared, like, please talk to parents too, because it's really hard, but I get it. They have laws as well. But sometimes they're called disabled student services. Honestly, they're called something different at every campus. So maybe being familiar with where most of your students go and what that office is called, maybe even inviting someone from the community college in that office to come to a session at your school. Again, if you're working in high school, you are familiar with accommodations for AP testing, SAT and ACT for students with 504 and IEPs. That is a process in and of itself. They have to be approved. College Board approves them. And that doesn't just happen. Like, for example, AP testing is next week. Accommodations were due in January. So if you are new to high school, just be aware of that. And then I want to share this amazing thing that got emailed to me, and it is actually a college fair for students with learning differences. And it's a whole bunch of colleges who are truly marketing and outreaching to students who may not believe they can go to college. And I just think that's super cool. So there's a link there and it'll be in the resource page as well. Just note that it is Eastern time. And so make sure if you're sharing it with students, you put Pacific time. This is a really great document. Again, we're just throwing a whole bunch of things at you, but this is an idea of maybe a K-12 modifications or accommodations that happen for a student or a 504 plan. So whether it's an IEP or 504, and what that could look like at the college level. Again, student advocating or someone advocating for them on what these accommodations could look like. So it's kind of hard to read in the here, but we also have it in the resource for you. But it's super helpful to kind of understand the difference between K-12 and post-secondary. All right, this is why many of you have come today. I just want to be clear. This is ASCA's position statement on school counselor roles. But again, you know, at least in California, we have not adopted the ASCA standards for school counselors. I hope your district has, but again, every board and every district is different. Even bargaining units may have different things in their contracts. So we're just telling you what the position statement says, but you really need to work within your district. A lot of these tools will be things you could use to advocate for things you want to do. But again, just being clear that this is not Tanya and Tracy saying this is how things should be done. We believe them, but there you go. So again, counselor support all students is we can just be done there. But here's appropriate school counselor responsibilities, right? So providing lessons, whether it's individual, group, to all students, but not forgetting maybe the class that is fully supported, right? It's really easy to do that and say, oh, they don't need the A through G presentation. Yeah, they can have the A through G presentation, right? Or even post-secondary conversations. And this doesn't just go for students with disabilities, but a lot of our maybe like English language learners, those kinds of things. So I'll get off that tangent. Definitely providing short-term goal-focused counseling. So this is not therapy. This is maybe a check-in, maybe you checking with them in the classroom, maybe checking in with family, those kinds of things. Again, encouraging family involvement and being the conduit of getting the parents involved in the process. Advocating, of course, for your student whenever needed. There's another page of appropriate. Again, contributing to a multidisciplinary team, whether that's an SST 504 meeting or the IEP team meeting. Definitely collaborating. You know, sometimes it's really hard when you're reading an IEP and realize that a student has occupational therapy or physical therapy, or sometimes speech and language services. How amazing to go and just connect with them and share kind of your position and what you're seeing with the student as well. They don't always get to know what's happening outside of what they see in the classroom. And then of course, providing assistance on those transition and post-secondary plans for students. Okay, here's the one that everybody wants, right? So what ASCA says is school counselors should not be sole deciders of any sort of placement, retention, or supervising the implementation of the IEP. Certainly should not be serving as the school district representative. Now that doesn't mean you're not a site representative or representing your role as a school counselor, but every IEP has an administrative role, a district admin role. Sometimes it's your site VP, but counselors should not be doing that. And then you certainly should not necessarily be writing, and I don't mean physically writing, because sometimes you are the note taker in the meeting, right? But you should not be the one person deciding what the 504 accommodations are by yourself, right? And then we certainly are not also providing long-term therapy. So if it's written into an IEP that you're doing that, you should not be.
So again, that's what ASCA says. It's not
Right.
what Tanya and Tracy said. And we just want to clarify that because sometimes we can take what's printed and say, this is what it says. So this is what we have to change in our school or in our district. It's a big process, which is why we are going to give you some of those resources and tools to hopefully get some of those inappropriate duties off your plate if they are. We know it's different everywhere. It took our district some time to get the process in place from where I was the one doing the 504s to where it was a more procedural process that was happening across our district. So it's just important to know that these changes take time, but here are some wonderful resources that we're providing that can help you advocate for your role, advocate for your position, and how you can get support. I wouldn't say, I don't need to be doing this, I shouldn't be doing this. No, it's like, here's how I can better support. Here are some better practices that can really utilize my strengths as a counselor, but I need support. I need help from our admin to put some of these things in place. So this is a resource shop full of links to different documents, different videos. Tracy and I will continue to add to this as we find things, but it's something that you can look for, find find the option that best fits what you're looking for and just read about it. Take a look at it. The more that you are versed and that you know about 504s and IEPs, what does ASCA say, those are going to be important for you to just have, in your toolkit. So there's a lot of different things for you to look through and browse through. We have the link, I think, yep, just put it in the chat. So all of this is available and accessible. And at the top is this presentation slide deck. So you have that as well as a resource. And as we see something needs to be updated, we will go ahead and make the changes there as well. So
Can I share my favorite one?
yes.
I mean, there's some really good things here. I'm not going to lie. I was excited putting it all together, but the sample 504 accommodations one, like, will list like asthma, or there's a whole list, and then it will tell you some sample accommodations, which sometimes that's the hardest part in those meetings of trying to figure out what would be an appropriate accommodation, especially when you're high school and you're trying to navigate 5 or 6 different classes and teachers and all those things. Maybe even having these samples ahead of time and talking to teachers about, hey, would this be an appropriate accommodation, really could help those meetings go a whole lot smoother. So that was one that just excited me. I'm just sharing.
So we do have time for some questions. I know there's a lot of them in there, but we do also love your feedback. So if you don't mind, you can either point your camera on the phone at the QR code, and it'll bring up the short survey right to your phone for you to answer, or Zarette will put the link into the chat. But please make sure that you complete that before you leave today. But we will go ahead and try to answer some of these questions as they pop into the chat. All right, so we have a question. Can you share information about manifestation determination? You want to take that one, Tracy?
Sure.
Okay.
So a manifestation determination meeting is required for students with an IEP and a 504, specifically around suspensions. And, those should not be, again, I'm trying to figure out the right way to say it, but like, that is not a counselor responsibility to serve as the person of a manifestation determination. Sometimes where it gets a little bit tricky is when it is a behavior issue and you're trying to determine. So a manifestation asks 2 questions. It asks, was the behavior a manifestation of the student's disability? Meaning, did the disability cause the behavior? And then therefore we need to look at consequences a little bit differently. And number 2, was the IEP being implemented? And I can tell you, as an assistant principal, I've sat in many meetings where a lot of those answers were yeses and nos and both. And so really trying to, that there really should be, members of the special ed team and maybe even district or site level administration, especially when you're determining, so a manifestation doesn't determine placement, it answers those 2 questions. And then based on those 2 questions, if it was a manifestation of the disability, then there's one way it goes. And then if the IEP was not being implemented, that's a whole nother conversation as well. So, we cannot hold the students, I shouldn't say responsible, but we cannot change a placement or suspend a student if their disability caused the issue and if we were not putting the IEP into place. And again, that is so much more beyond a school counselor role. But in my opinion, a school counselor should be a part of that process, because again, if it's a student you've been working with, I'm 100% about advocating for our students. You can speak about them in and outside of the classroom, and also help determine what an appropriate placement might be for them down the line when those questions are answered. So I don't know if that answered the question on manifestation determination, but that is a part of both the 504 and an IEP process.
And then Megan asks, has SDCOE counseling ever considered pushing out recommendations of roles and responsibilities for counselors as they relate to the 504 process? And that's what we're doing today, putting that out there. Because we're at the county, we can only provide recommendations, we can only provide the resources and the support, but each school district is separate and they are the ones that are going to determine what's board policy, what the roles look like, and define those. So what we can do is provide leadership and support around those areas to administrators. And I know the county puts out a 504 workshop every year. And I do try to make sure that that's included in our professional development learning page and in the newsletter. But that I can't put out what's law or what's appropriate except for as a support, as a resource. And that's where the advocacy comes in, that we have to take on to, if there's a change that needs to be made, here are some supporting documents to support why. And so I apologize that I can't be the enforcer of it, but that's just where my role falls. Okay. And then can you elaborate on what it looked like for you to get the process started to shift the professional responsibility from counselor to admin? You know, it took someone at a higher level for sure in the Grossmont district for that to happen. You know, we were fortunate too, when you have counselors that become administrators, that's also really helpful. They understand both roles. I'm not sure where that happened at our district level when that shift took place. I just remember getting a memo saying this is how it's going to be done. And then we were to attend certain trainings. And then every year thereafter, we had mandatory trainings that we had to attend to get any updates, but it was always all administrators, all counselors at those meetings.
Tanya, I actually think it was SDCOE coming in doing a workshop, the team that you're talking about that does the things. And then also, it sounds funny, but it was our attorney, the attorney that we use, came in and also did a workshop on that. So if you're a larger district and you have an attorney's office that you use, especially your special education department that uses a specific attorney, they would love to come, because half of what they get when it gets to the attorney piece, right, it's because of a policy or something that wasn't done at the school site or in the IEP of why it ends up in litigation. And so I know our attorney loves to come out and do presentations, because if she can prevent it getting to her, that's huge.
Yeah. And whoops, sorry, chat keeps switching. In Escondido, it took a lot of advocacy and Trish Hatch working with us for districts to make a shift. Yep. And providing the resources to support that. So agree. And the more people that you can kind of help you to see where you might need that support is all the better. And it also puts all the counselors on the same page. If you have someone coming in, and like I said, that was what happened in our district. Once everybody got on the same page and we all understood, it really, really helped. It's hard sometimes because administrators and our supervisors want things a certain way. I know, and it makes it feel impossible to get changes happening with counselor roles. I understand. And I know administrators change. They move around, they get promotions, they leave, they retire. So there's a lot of factors in that too. I know that at the last school that I was at as a school counselor before coming to SDCOE, I had 4 different administrators in 7 years. And so by the time I got to the 4th administrator, we were doing the SST meetings. I knew the students better. I knew the families. And so I may have taken a little bit of a leadership role in the SST process, but the administrator was always present. So sometimes you feel that way. You feel like you're the one leading the work because you have to help bring on that support until they feel comfortable. But for me, because it's about the student, I was okay with that, but I still wasn't writing it. I wasn't doing all of the other things that were inappropriate to my role.
And I just want to remind you, I know this is a counseling presentation, but I need to share that as a high school administrator myself, we're human too. And we're learning, and sometimes something that can come across as maybe like they don't want to do it or absolutely not is really because of a lack of understanding and not wanting to seem like they don't know. And so if there's any way you can come use those counseling skills with the administrators and come alongside and share. But if you come out that you know something that they don't know, you're going to get pushback, because that's just the role that they have on a campus and kind of the perception they want to have. So just remember that, like, administrators don't know everything also, and many were not school counselors. But truly, I would say 99.9% of us wake up in the morning and want to do right by students and kids and want to advocate for our students. So just remember that we're human too.
Absolutely. All right. And I know that there were some questions about specific resources for parents for SSTs and 504s. Take a look at the resource shop because we did include some of those. And then sometimes when you click on a resource, then it'll take you down a rabbit hole until you find some of the answers you're looking for. I know that understood.org has some parent resources for both 504s and SST and IEPs. So hopefully you can find what you're looking for there. But we are at time. Hopefully you were able to complete the survey. If you have other questions, we are also resources, and we put our email addresses on our slide deck where our information is located. So feel free to reach out to us as well. Again, we don't have all of the answers, but in the experience that we have and in some of the things that we've used, hopefully you find them useful to move this work forward.